Step 1 is to read the question. What does it mean when someone says shaking like a leaf? My next step is to take out the question words. So I see a WH word right here, what, and then I see what does. So what does is going to go away. I'm left with it mean when someone says shaking like a leaf. So step 3 is to decide on your answer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to the chapter 11, and I'm going to go and I'm going to kind of scan and look for shaking like a leaf. Oh, Deborah was shaking like a leaf. All right. So since we've already read the chapter, we know that we can kind of go back and remember what was happening. So I have, she handed him Dr. Binney's letter. She was so afraid of what Dr. Binney had written to the general that she ran out of the room before the general could say a word. An hour later, General Patterson sent for her. Deborah was shaking like a leaf. He asked her to sit down. His voice was kind. So I did notice that it says she was so afraid that she ran out of the room. An hour later, Deborah is shaking like a leaf. Okay, so I can't give you the answer, but hopefully that will help a little bit. All right, so now that we've decided on our answer, we're going to write it with the leftover parts of the question. So I think I'm going to start here where it says when someone says shaking like a leaf, and then I'm going to answer my question. So when someone, and I'm going to put this into blue since it's now our answer. When someone says shaking like a leaf, it means blank. So that's where I would fill in the rest of my answer. Don't forget when you're all done typing to proofread and make sure that you make sense. When someone says shaking like a leaf, it means blah, 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 blah. Step 1 is to read the question. Why was Deborah shaking like a leaf? Step 2 is to take out the question words. I see a WH word right here, so I'm going to go ahead and cross that out. Step 3 is to decide on your answer and write it with the leftover parts of the question. So why was Deborah shaking like a leaf? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back into the reading and find my answer. Now, in question number 1, we talked about what it means when somebody says shaking like a leaf. Now we're talking about why Deborah is shaking like a leaf. Okay, why might she be shaking? This is what we've talked about in 3rd grade when we talked about inferencing. It doesn't exactly say right in the text, Deborah was shaking like a leaf because do. Instead, we have to use what we already know in our heads and what we've learned, dropped something. So we want to think about what we know in our head already and what we've learned about in this book so far, what we know about Deborah and what she's been doing, and we're going to smush those together and we're going to think about why she, specifically, Deborah, was shaking like a leaf. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start answering my question. So I'm going to use these parts. Deborah. Now I know was is over here, but I'm going to put it after Deborah. So Deborah was shaking like a leaf because. We love this word because, right? And then that's where the rest of your answer will go. Deborah was shaking like a leaf because blank. Whoops, that's not a period. There we go. Oh, that's still not a period. There we go. Alrighty, we're taking a look at number 3. So step 1 is to read the question. How did Deborah prove she was Robert Shurtleff? Step 2 is to take out the question marks. So I see how, and I'm going to get rid of did too. Also, if you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I should get rid of that word. I mean, if you cross it out, what's the worst that could happen? Nothing really. Maybe you erase it or you just add it in. No big deal. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cross that out. So Deborah proved she was Robert Shurtleff. All right, we got to find our answer. So I'm going to go back into the text. So I have my first page here. This is when we know Deborah's shaking like a leaf. I'm going to scan and see what's happening. So I have the general saying he could not believe this strange story. Can it really be so? That kind of gives me a clue that Deborah might be trying to prove something, right? Maybe that she's Robert Shurtleff. So I'm still scanning. And then, looks like, then she thought of a plan and her eyes shone with mischief. So I'm going to keep scanning, and I'm going to see if Deborah comes up with a plan to prove that she's Robert Shurtleff. So once I have my answer, I'm going to go back and I'm going to start restating. Now, if I take the words from the question, I would say, Deborah proved she was Robert Shurtleff. That sounds kind of silly, right? So we need to make this past tense. Deborah proved she was Robert Shurtleff. I could now here, when I'm answering it, I might say by doing blah, 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 blah. Or I could say Deborah proved she was Robert Shurtleff because she did blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, those are two options that you might want to use. Do you have to use exactly what I said? No, as long as you restate the question. Okay? So then I would go back once I have my answer. Deborah proved she was Robert Shurtleff because blank. Okay.